Thank you, Aaron. That was really informative, and I think this program is just great. I'd like to remind the audience that if you have questions for either of the speakers, put them in the chat because we're not monitoring raised hands. So now we're going to move on to our second speaker for today, who is Dr. Justin Simon, and he will be talking about NASA Astromaterials Research Facilities, or NFAR. Dr. Simon is a planetary scientist in the ARES division, Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science at Johnson Space Center. Before he came to Johnson Space Center, he worked at the University of California, Berkeley and the Berkeley Geochronology Center as a postdoctoral fellow. Currently, he is the director of the Center for Isotope Geochemistry and Geochronology at JSC, based within ARES. His research group conducts laboratory measurements on meteorites and samples returned by spacecraft to address questions of rocky planet formation, ranging from the solar system's earliest solids to the crusts of habitable planets. So take it away, Justin.
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen, but I have multiple screens, so I'm going to need a confirmation that I'm sharing the right screen. Well, I'll start with, while Mary is finding my slides, I'll just start by, welcoming you all and welcoming, I guess, to the presentation for NASA's Facility for Astromaterials Research, or NFAR. We are one of the PSEF selectees, as Dr. Aaron Burton introduced. And the NFAR is at NASA, but we are like one of the many NFAR, PSF presentations or center or selectees that you just heard about. It, we are part of this program and at NASA. Our focus is really trying to enable direct access to the research and curation experts that we have here at the Johnson Space Center. And we have a lot of expertise, specialized expertise with sample handling and analysis of astromaterials. And so this is really what our if you will, our facility is all about. And so I assume everybody can see the screen that I can see, which is my first slide. And so I will start in, I guess. Again, my name is Justin Simon, and I've been, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I've been at NASA for about 15 years, and I'm really excited about this program, and really, I think, want to hopefully convey this excitement through your virtual experience, because it really benefits a lot of people. I think not just the NFAR, but the facilities, all of them collectively. I'm going to focus on NFAR now, though. Again, our focus is really to expand access to the astromaterial facilities here at the Johnson Space Center. To include early or non-traditional users, or people who do not have their own facilities at their own home institutions. And I will also just be really honest that it helps us here at ARES as well, because this obviously covers some of our costs, and then it really fosters new scientific collaborations, which is have huge benefit. All right, next slide, please. So I will first start with expertise, and you'll see that the expertise is also going to be feeding into the sort of the facilities that we have. So we have, I've broken our expertise into 4 different groups, sort of the analytical expertise. And so that is mineralogy, microstructures, elemental composition, isotope ratios, those types of measurements. Then we have a group of scientists who are really involved with missions and doing science that enables mission science. And so some of that is related to instruments or payloads on instruments. We have an extensive mineral library that we use for calibrating these instruments. And then also we have the expertise to help sort of set up and plan and execute field analog on Earth analog mission work. And then we have an analog mission work, and I realized that I just said analog for the mission enabling, but this analog I mean here is a sort of a experimental petrology analog. So we're experimentally producing chemical processes or mineralogical occurrences in various different environments, whether it be near the surface of a planetary body or in the interior or through impact. We have an impact gun, if you will. And then finally, our fourth category of expertise is that we have a ton of sample handling and preliminary examination. And to do this is a combination of scientists at ARES, but also some of the curation facility and their scientists as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So next, I'm going to just kind of go through the same four groups, but just mention the sort of the primary. I was going to mention the primary various different labs and various different types of analyses that we can do. So this whole slide is focused on the first one, the analytical group. And so we, like I mentioned, we have sort of a mineralogical or a microtextural suite of facilities and experts. So this would include a transmission electron microscope. We have with EELS that provides sort of atomic level microstructures and composition. We have several scanning electron microscopes. We have some Raman. We also do in situ element or molecular species measurements. So we also have an ion probe. We have several laser ablation facilities, one that is for inorganic measurements, the laser ablation ICP-MS. We have some for organics. We also do sort of the gold standard electron probe work, focusing electron beams. We have a number of what we would call high resolution elemental or molecular species measurements. So we can do this by ID-TIMS, the thermal ionization mass spectrometer. We can do this by solution analysis with the ICP-MS, which is the inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometers. Then we have a number of GC or other types of quadrupole type MSs for organic species or organic abundances. We have in situ capabilities for isotopes and molecular species. So I broke it out between elements and isotopes. Some of these facilities are the same, but of course the methods and analyses are distinct. And then we have our sort of high resolution isotopic measurements. So that would be your multi-collector ICP-MS, your TIMS, and then your GC laser fluorination, which primarily is focused on oxygen isotope measurements. And I mentioned this once, and I'll mention it again, is that we have expertise and we also have facilities for handling astromaterials, rare, precious samples. We have an ion polishing facility, and I'll show an example of that, of a number of ancillary equipment that allows us to manipulate or to extract portions of these samples in various different environments, from ones that are less concerned to some that are very concerned with contamination control. So we have a number of clean labs as well. I updated my slide set to say that we have, as of today, selected 29 projects. And we, as Dr. Burton was saying, this facility was selected in April of 23. So I have to update all of my numbers, but we now have 23 early career selectees and 9 underrepresented individuals as of the end of this month. All right, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is the second of the 4. So our mission enabling group. This includes a number of different facilities that allow us to study largely near surface environments, ones that instruments on spacecraft, rovers, landers would be investigating. So that allows us to do some aqueous chemistry, X-ray diffraction for mineralogy, some ICP-MS, a different facility and different instrument, but this one is mostly focused on cations and anions and aqueous solutions. We have a number of facilities that enable us to mimic, as I was mentioning before, some of the instruments that are on rovers or other spacecraft. So some of that is looking at gas, some of that is looking at visual spectra, mass power, and different types of instruments that we have in space. And then our third is the analog or the experimental studies facilities. And these are sort of some of your conventional experimental labs, the 1-bar furnaces and your piston cylinder being less conventional. We also are setting up a vacuum facility so you can run experiments under vacuum in different gas conditions. So we're pretty excited about that. And then finally, the main facilities that are in our sort of preliminary sample examination suite include the 3 here listed. We have a micro-XCT computed tomography lab, a bit like the one at UT. We have a Raman spectra, and then we have a micro-XRF. If you could move to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to provide a couple examples. I'm not going to focus so much on the science, but just examples of projects that we have conducted. So this first one is a project that was really focused on some of the materials returned from the asteroid Ryugu. And the key here is, these are relatively rare, they're small. But in this case, these chondrite materials or chondritic materials, excuse me, are pretty friable. They fall apart and they're difficult to polish and difficult to handle and work with. And so the proposer was seeking to use the ion polisher so they could do some subsequent in situ measurements. And so it's hard to see in these images, but basically there was a piece of the returned material. It was then ion polished. And so that ion polish worked really well. If you do things by hand, if all of your materials are the same material, it's pretty straightforward. You can polish it pretty well. But if you have some soft stuff and some hard stuff, you get plucking, you get poor polishing on some or better polishing on others. The ion polisher sort of eliminates that physical part and polishes off most materials pretty well. And then you can see in the lower right here an excellent example of the various different crystallographic aspects of that polished sample that was enabled by our scanning electron microscope and the EBSD and of course the expertise that we have at JSC. So the different false colors are just showing you different particles or different grains that are in different orientations. Some of them are different minerals as well. All right, next slide, please. So this example, project number 2, is one that is highlighting a creative experiment that was run, or a series of experiments that were run by our experimental petrology group, our experimental analog group. And in this case, this individual was interested in some outgassing to model the types of the different various processes for exoplanet atmosphere formation. And so they were utilizing some of, again, the expertise, but also some of the various different heating and experimental devices that we have. And then they subsequently measured with Raman and the SEM the different reaction products. So you can see in the sort of middle, you have some condensates from those vaporization and condensation experiments under the SEM. So those are little particles. But what was really clever about this and enabled by our team was that they were able to produce these experiments within this, basically, if you want, a test tube. It's not a test tube, but it's basically a test tube. Without opening it up, they were able to use the Raman to evaluate the textures, the minerals, and the composition of those, the low temperature. You can't see it very well. The lowest temperatures on the top, and then the higher temperatures on the bottom. But so they're very different. This range of experimental products. So that was a suite of different facilities that were kind of coming together that we have all here at JSC that we were able to employ with this project. All right, the final project that I'm highlighting is number 3. If you could move to the next slide, please. So this one is really to highlight our laser ablation capability. We have about 5 or 6 lasers in our building. 2 of them are in the Center for Isotope Cosmochemistry and Geochronology that allow us to do elemental and isotopic measurements. And this was one of those. This is the excimer laser that we have coupled to our ICP-MS. And this was a developmental project that was seeking to establish accurate aluminum magnesium chronology for the early solar system. And the problem here is that we want to make measurements by ion probe or laser ablation multi-collector ICP-MS, but we don't have the standards and the calibrated compositions that we need. And this is typically done with the electron probe. But when you have instances where you have some phases that have very different amounts of the parent and daughter, that is the aluminum versus magnesium in this case, it's hard to do with the electron probe because the electron probe just doesn't have the sensitivity in this case for the magnesium. And so with the laser, we do have that sensitivity, and we were able to come up with a technique that allowed us to measure both the aluminum and the magnesium in situ for a series of experiments on these refractory phases, these ceramics. This corundum is maybe something people are familiar with, but then there's hibonite, grossite, and crotonite that are various versions of calcium aluminum oxides that we could then use, because these are found in the natural experiments, that we can calibrate these standards and then use to calibrate our other in situ measurements and get presumably accurate ages. So that's really highlighting the laser ablation capability. All right, so if you can move on to the next slide. So, Aaron already talked about this a little bit for each of the different proposals or selected projects, but we have a process, and I thought it would be useful to go through that, but also to talk a little bit about I guess our rules of the road, if you will. We have no due date, so we have a rolling admission. You can submit your proposal anytime. Our goal is to evaluate and return a decision after about or within 6 weeks, and except for a very few cases, we've been able to do that. In our process, it's a competitive peer-reviewed proposal process, and each proposal receives 3 reviews. Typically, 1 or 2 of those reviewees are people who are going to be carrying out the work, and maybe even hopefully have been in contact with the people that would like to use the facility. So it's a fast-tracked process. We help people come up with compelling proposals. We are typically making 20% of the access to our facilities at no cost to the external user. This doesn't mean that one lab has 20%, but on average across all the labs, we have 10 to 20% per year. In reality, some of the labs are sought after more than others, so we have to manage that. I will say that in addition to the expertise in the facilities, we are trying to provide insight into how or why you might want to use certain facilities. We recognize that some people have already got an idea of what they want to use, and some people don't. And so we have been running a number of workshops. These aren't directly related to our NFAR program, but they are intimately linked. For example, this last September, we gave a workshop along with the LPI focused on isotope geochemistry and cosmochemistry. And front and center were the facilities that we have here at JSC. And you can look at those web pages to look up a little bit more about what we talked about. But we had 10 early career scientists come, and we helped them, I think, better understand what types of capabilities we have and how they might use those to address their specific scientific projects. All right, next slide, please. So this is sort of my where to start slide. Obviously, you can always contact me, or Aaron Burton, and then he probably will pass you on to me. But again, for these 4 different groups, we have a number of sort of subject matter leads. Lindsay Keller primarily is the one who you'd want to contact if you're interested in mineralogy or microstructures. I would be the one that you would want to reach out to for elemental or isotopic compositions. Dr. Liz Rampey is the contact that you would have for the mission enabling work. And then Francis McCubbin would be the individual that we would recommend that you contact for the experimental or the analog work. And then again, for the preliminary sample examination or general questions, you can go just to this JSC NFAR website, or excuse me, email address, or mine. That actually goes to me. So I'll find it either way. That last red text there has the website for our research laboratories. And so you can look and read more about the actual facilities. All right, would you go to the next slide, please? So this is literally stolen from a poster that we gave about our the NFAR facility, and this is essentially all of the details that you need for your proposal. So just to reiterate, this is a somewhat fast-tracked process. We try to do it under 6 weeks. The proposal itself is also a somewhat practical process. It's not a long proposal. It's 3 to 5 pages, and we're really looking for these details. We will, not support things that are not relevant to NASA's PSD, excuse me, unless it's super compelling. Once we get past that point, we encourage everybody to work with us to find how we can support their work. And we'll provide, if you don't know exactly how long a certain analysis will take, that's why I recommend those other names. We'll help you identify how many visits you might need to complete your experiment or your investigation, and kind of walk you through that process. Obviously, at the bottom we have, we are we're careful, and we are, I guess you could say, kind of controlling, but we don't, we need to understand what kind of materials you might be analyzing. And so, partly what we want to know is that we're not going to have something that's super precious that we lose, or something that's dangerous that might hurt somebody. So those are the types of details, but it's really a practical laundry list for the proposal. All right. I was hoping to actually go through the website. We have a website, and show folks how we could do that, but since I'm not sharing, I don't know, Mary, are you able to just go to a browser?
Yes, I could if you want me to.
Yeah. So I just mentioned that I'm having a moment, a senior moment. The what is the square on the right? QR code. Thank you, Justin. That's my other half of my brain. That QR code will get you directly to the proposal site. So I don't know if you want to do that, Mary, or you can just go to a browser and I can tell you what to type in.
I think it's easier if you tell me what to type in, because
Okay, why don't you go to ares.jsc.nasa.gov. So get out of my presentation, please.
Okay. You said JSC?
Yep, .nasa.gov. And so this is our general first page for the Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division. If you go to research, the top banner, sorry, you go to research, and then if you go down to the bottom, it says NASA Facility for Astromaterials Research. If you click on that, so this is where it would go, and then you can go to view the guidelines for preparing proposals. In the middle orange, or yep, that link. So that's basically what I showed you. And if you go back one, so then if you say submit, this is going to take you to the actual submittal. Obviously, you won't submit one, but so this is basically what we're looking for. So you put your name in, and then you click all these things, and then I'm not suggesting. If you don't know exactly what you want to, or you might need for your science, I would suggest reaching out to one of those 4 or somebody else that is an expert in the labs. But to help us find the best reviewers, you can click on these different analytical facilities or instruments, and we can work to find the best reviewers for your proposal. On the right, those are all links that you can click. If you want to click your favorite link, that'll go to the various different facilities. Some of them are instruments, some of them are lab suites, et cetera, et cetera. And they're largely grouped to those same analytical, mission enabling, analog and preliminary examination concepts. The coordinated analysis and the geocosmochemistry are really all the analytical group. So it's really that's it, and that's really what I have to say. I'm happy to answer questions, and I know Aaron is also available and happy to answer questions.
Okay, Justin, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I've asked you all to put questions in the chat if you have any, but unless I'm doing something wrong here, I don't see any questions in the chat. Mary, I think there was one question submitted online ahead of time. Is that right?
Yes, I had the question, will the recordings of these meetings be available for access at the end of the series? And I can actually answer that question. The recordings will be available from the presenters who give consent for the recordings to be posted. And the PDF presentation will also be available on the meeting website. It usually takes a couple weeks to a month for them to be posted. It shouldn't take too long though, because there's not a whole lot of presentations. And I will send out an email as soon as they're available to anybody who is registered for the meeting.
I'll also reiterate that if you're eager to get going, if you just send us an email, I'd be happy to provide my own slides or provide any answers to the questions for specific facilities or what have you. We're here to support your user needs, and we're also, and I didn't mention this, and I should have. One of the things that makes the NFAR facility proposal notable is it's within the ARES I guess capabilities and mission that we have, which is also in training. And so we expect to have people who have questions contact us so we can help direct them. It's not as though we expect you to know everything. So feel free to contact Lindsay or Liz or Francis or myself or other people here, and we'll set you straight as best we can.
Okay, we have one question in the chat. Are the laboratories at JSC busy at particular times of the year?
Yeah, that's a super helpful and important question, and the answer is absolutely. We are busy all year long. I mean, we have, and this is part of the point I was trying to make at the beginning is that we are a very active group of scientists, and it's a benefit for, it's a win-win, right? We're expanding our capabilities and bringing in new collaborations. And what have you. And so having this funding is helpful because it provides that sort of that warm cup of coffee in the morning to keep us stable and going forward. Your question really is about times of the year. These are the typical times for an academic scientist as well in terms of research, leading up to LPSC or Goldschmidt or METSOC. And these are times where the facilities are highly subscribed. And in general, part of our promise to our selectees is that we'll get their proposed work done, but we also want, and tell them that they have to recognize that we are fitting this in to a full schedule. I mean, almost all of our highly sought after facilities are scheduled out. So it's not like you could walk into the building and expect to get onto one of these. But we are committed to making sure people get it done. So if you have a question about a specific facility, I would recommend, in terms of timing and usage, I would recommend that you reach out to the laboratory manager or to one of those 4 people that I mentioned, and we can help guide you. But if you're looking to get data for LPSC and you contact us even in October, it'll be difficult. Certainly don't contact us in December and expect to get results for January 7th.
Justin, I actually have a question myself for you. Somewhere early in your presentation, you mentioned laser fluorination MS for oxygen isotopes. Is that part of your lab at CIC CG, or is that?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's not. This is run by Paul Niles and Justin Hales. There is maybe a little confusion because there's a couple Justins here. And it's a different facility. It's been around for a long while, actually, the sort of desire or the capability to make stable isotope measurements. Most in the past, it was primarily focused on solutions and some gases, but we recently, when I say recently, I mean last 4 or 5 years, added the laser fluorination line, which allows us to look at silicates and oxides and sulfides, other solid rocks. And so, and we have not done a ton of measurements for the external community yet. We have had one successful NFAR proposal submitted, and I'm not exactly sure where we are in terms of those measurements, but Justin Hales has demonstrated the ability for it to work and has run standards, and it's I would say state of the art. I mean, it's really doing well. We can make three oxygen isotope measurements. So that is, both the stable, but also the triple oxygen isotope measurements um, uh, of bulk materials, but also small materials. It's not a in situ yet, but it is a laser that's hitting a sample. Typically, you have a small pile. You have a couple crystals or something like this that you're hitting with the laser and fluorinating it, and then you're extracting out the oxygen through the cryo line. But it allows us to measure these solids and to a very high precision and accuracy. I don't want to misquote their current capability, but it's as good as anybody is doing in the world. I would say it's certainly better than 10 ppm precision. If Justin was here, he would argue that it's more like 5, somewhere in that category of precision. So oftentimes you see per mil level effects in astromaterials, and where I was quoting per 10 parts per million, not parts per thousand, that we can do. And so 10 parts per million, when many of the variabilities or variations that we see in astromaterials is parts per thousand, or if in some cases you have a pre-solar grain, it's even weight percent. Of course, then I would recommend that you use the nanosims or some other facility, because you don't need that kind of precision. And maybe you need spatial resolution that those in situ techniques do.
Okay, thanks.
Either that or Zach did something upstairs.
Somebody, I don't know who's talking, but we do have one question in the chat now. When we take samples from their natural environment, how do you confirm we get the same chemical composition on the outer surface of the sample?
I think the question has to do with sample handling. And it's a really good question. And it really depends on what type of analysis you're aiming to do and what kind of questions you're asking. Aaron would answer this question differently than I would. His I would say his bread and butter when he was a bench top scientist or bench scientist was organic materials and prebiotic studies. And I don't want to speak for him, but he looks at my lab and thinks, oh my goodness, there's plastic everywhere. Those gloves, they're terrible. It's confusing everything that I'm trying to do. Whereas I'm very concerned in the inorganic labs with particulate and inorganic contamination. So it really depends on what the scientific question is. But typically, if it were a geologic process or geologic sample, you would get a big chunk and you go after the interior to try to get away from the alteration or the weathering that you might have at the edges. Obviously, with astromaterials, you get what you get often, and you have to kind of characterize the entirety, if you will, and try to understand, what, looking through the secondary processes or the handling processes, what the primary or the pristine formation process was. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward. If you have a meteorite and it has a fusion crust, you can identify, and it's broken up. So you have a largely exposed fresh surface in the inside, and then you have the fusion crust. If you're interested in the fusion crust process, you would obviously look at the fusion crust. But if you're interested in the, what parent body that sample came from, like you, Serena, often do, you would, you stay away from the fusion crust and go after the interior. I don't know if that answered the question's question, but I could keep going for another hour about that.
Okay. Not seeing any new questions show up. Mary, could you go on to the next slide, please? Well, okay, there's something I wanted to say before this. I just wanted to thank both today's speakers again and point out that we have one more session coming up in this series. That will be next Wednesday afternoon at the same time. And our speaker is going to be Katie Robinson of NASA headquarters, and she'll be talking about how to write proposals and try to get funding from NASA to do all this kind of good work. The last sample, the last slide, if you could put it back up there, Mary. I just want to point out, do a little advertising for LPI's next event coming up. We have a workshop. It will be a virtual workshop that's called Itakawa and the Dawn of Asteroidal Sample Return, talking about obviously the Hayabusa mission and the beginning of asteroidal sample return and the general topic of asteroid meteorite connections, and that'll be in late January. And I guess that's the end of our afternoon session. Thanks to everybody who joined us, and thanks to the speakers again.